Hello everyone, my name is Dom Hebblethwaite and I'm Head of Membership at the Chartered Institute of Linguists, CIOL. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our webinar on machine translation post-editing, looking at the theory, best practice and pitfalls. Let me introduce you to our distinguished presenter today, Dragos Ciobanu. Dragos is Professor of Computational Terminology and Machine Translation in the Center for Translation Studies at the University of Vienna. Dragos leads their research group on human and artificial intelligence in translation and investigates ways to improve localization workflows by integrating translation and speech technologies, as well as methods to optimize collaborative translation and training practices. Dragos collaborates with LSPs from around the world and trains linguists from international organizations such as the United Nations to maximize the use of language, localization, and project management technologies. Dragos, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much, Dom and Sahila, for the invitation. I'm having some herbal tea because I'm in Vienna and British tea is not quite the thing here yet.
Very good, very good. Okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. We have 500 people registered for this webinar. So in order to manage the webinar efficiently, everyone's camera and microphone has been switched off. And we're going to start with some polling to understand you, our audience, and understand your experiences with post-editing. Then we'll be treated by Dragos to a comprehensive introduction to MT post-editing, including some important tips and suggestions on how to work in the most effective way possible. There will be time for a Q&A and all questions will be managed via the questions panel chat facility. So please go ahead, post your questions as we go along, and we'll try and cover as many as we can. Okay, so I think great. We can start off with the first poll. So if we could load that up. Just to let everyone know, all our polls are anonymous. We do not keep the results or use them for any other purposes other than this webinar. So are you a COL member? Please select one. Okay. We'll call up and we'll close that poll now. So we have 63% COL members, 38% not. Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. If we can load the second poll. So is English in your language pair? Yes, I have English as a source language. Yes, I have English as target language. No, I don't have English either as source or target, translating between two other languages.
That's also to anticipate some of the examples I'll use where English is generally involved, but there will also be other languages on display as well.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so we'll just hold this open for another sort of 2 or 3 seconds. And if you can get your votes in, okay, thank you. I think we can close this poll now as well.
This is faster than Strictly.
So there you go. So English as source language, 52%, English as target, 47%, and 1% without English either as source or target. Hopefully you still get lots from this webinar as well. So thank you very much. And I appreciate some people are saying they have English both as source and target. Hopefully you have just answered with the way you translate the most. So okay, thank you very much. If we can load up the third question. How often do you post edit? Always, most of the time, sometimes never. Yes, a very important question to understand where people are here. So we'll keep this open for another 5 seconds because this is very interesting to see. So we'll just have another sort of 3 seconds, 2, 1, and we will close the poll. Okay, 7% always post edit. 18% most of the time, sometimes 62%, and never 13%. So that's again very interesting, and thank you very much for that. And then we have our fourth question. If you post edit, so only those who are post editing, not the people who said never, is that because it's required by the client? Got no choice, have to do it. It's a personal productivity tool. Clients not required it, but we find it helps us to translate faster or anything else, or could be either. Sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other. So again, we'll hold this open for another few seconds. This is another very interesting question. We'll say just another couple of seconds, 2, 1, and we'll close the poll.
I hope nobody's feeling like they are being interrogated. It's just helpful to adjust what we're going to say.
It is fascinating. So 42%, so most often because it's required by the client, 25% as a personal productivity tool, and 34% either. So that's also very interesting. Sometimes it's required, but if it's not, you might use MT and post edit as a personal productivity tool as well. Very good. Okay, and we've got one last question, possibly the most obscure question, but it's a very interesting one. And this will certainly touch into something covered at the end of the presentation.
Yes.
How do you post edit? Again, obviously this is only for those post editing, but do you post edit in silence? Are you dictating? Are you listening to the source and or target text? So an interesting question, and we'll see what this brings. We have a guess, but we'll see. So we'll hold this open just another 2 seconds. 2, 1. Okay. In silence, 90%. Dictating 1%. Listening to the source or target 9%. So actually, you know, certainly some people are using this method. So that is very interesting. Okay. So that was really very interesting. Thank you to everyone for contributing to that. And Dragos, we are now ready to hand the reins over to you, and you may begin your presentation.
Super. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone attending. It's really nice to speak to such a large audience of CIL members, but also fellow translators. I play with technology, and I've been playing with technology for a while, but my background is in translation and interpreting. So I was trained as a translator and interpreter at the University of Iași in Romania. So I think I share in that respect the training with quite a few members of the CIOL. And then I worked as an in-house translator and technical writer for a year before moving to Leeds to do my PhD and also work at the University of Leeds, where I stayed until 2020. So it was about 17 years in total. And now I am in Vienna, where I'm very fortunate to be leading a research group, as Dom was saying, is the High Trans Research Group and the Human and Artificial Intelligence in Translation, where together with Alina, with Miguel, with Claudia, Raluca, and Justus, we look at ways to use technology in better ways, or maybe even customize some of the available technology to help translators. So we are, I'd like to think, quite applied in our research focus. Not going to spend too much on this, because if anyone really cares, we also have a website which is fairly up to date. But in our work, we are quite curious about the use of speech technologies, both dictation and synthesis, speech synthesis, in the work of translators, but also revisers and post editors. So we focus on that as one of our important strands, hence the last question in your questionnaire. We also play with machine translation fine-tuning and also engine building, and we see what kind of benefits that brings. We focus on accessibility as well, and in combination with translation technologies. And we finally try to bring all of this into our classrooms to try and prepare our students for what's to come. It's a bit of a crystal ball situation. Nobody has one, but at least we try. So I've done my best to make this presentation hopefully useful for everyone. So I hope there will be at least one new and interesting thing in it for everyone. But I have to start with a really big disclaimer, and that's translators' favorite reply to questions. It depends. So there's a lot of discussion around machine translation. There's been for years, and there are always some situations which justify a particular use of the technology, and others where that use is not as efficient. There are differences between languages, also between domains, and there isn't enough training data to have parity across language pairs and domains, as I mentioned. So it all depends. There have been cases of great success when implementing machine translation, and I think everyone has at least one or two examples when the technology kind of hit the net. So not so good. Australian Open reference sneakily inserted there. So yeah, we've got examples around us of everything pretty much, simply because the industry is so vast and there are so many possible workflows. So in this presentation, I'll try to keep a balanced view and not join sort of sides or take sides, because, as I said, there are many situations, many possible implementations, but there are still a few common threads. So on the success side, some of you might have already seen how, for instance, Airbnb has been using machine translation provided by Translated in their business, and it was a big piece of news, and it's considered a successful implementation. Also, e-translation is a service offered by the European Union now to SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, but also universities, EU freelance translators, public administrations. So essentially, you're getting the same machine translation models that the in-house translators of the EU are getting, and it's again a success story. And there are many such stories around. I'm sure there are many more. And also that justifies a really big increase in the number of companies offering machine translation services or machine translation customization services. And if you have a look at one of the reports produced by Intento, who produce yearly reports on they're called the state of machine translation, you will see a lot of name dropping, and it's useful to get an overview of who is building and offering generic models of machine translation, who is working on more domain-specific vertical ones, who supports custom terminology, whose models can be adapted once and then left and then perhaps adapted again, whose models can be adapted on the fly, and also which large language models are around that also have machine translation capabilities. So if you're really interested in finding more in-depth information, start from Intento and then start looking into all these providers. But generally, in all conversations, including with my students, or maybe starting with my students, this question, is neural machine translation perfect or excellent or sufficient? It always comes up. And this is a quote from Philip Cohen's neural machine translation book. And this will be familiar to users of statistical machine translation, which was the previous paradigm before neural machine translation, before 2016. And it's interesting to start from this realization that compared to statistical machine translation, neural machine translation may be less adequate. And generally you will see in this presentation, but also when you read on machine translation, you'll see all of these hedging devices maybe, could be, and they're just justified because, as I said, it all depends on the context and the deployment and the training data. So we can't really give super certain answers, but all we can do is try, look at the results, and then see and compare. So in comparison to statistical machine translation, and I'll have examples of how machine translation output evolved. Neural machine translation could be less adequate, so you might get some adequacy, some accuracy differences, even if it is more fluent. So that's one of the first features that got people excited. Doesn't neural machine translation all of a sudden read really well as if a person has written it? Yes, it's more fluent, but sometimes it's unpredictably inaccurate. So in other words, translations may diverge from the input in various ways, such as not translating part of sentences, so omissions, or generated unrelated output words, which are usually called hallucinations for neural machine translation. But we'll see. There might be cases where these hallucinations are actually welcome. So let's start with some examples. One example, because I must confess, I'm dependent on machine translation. My German is improving, let's say, but still, it's since I've been living in Vienna, I need a lot of support, at least getting the gist of what my university is trying to tell me. So I use machine translation on a daily basis, and this is an example of part of an email I received in German, and then the automatic translation in my email client, and we see big gaps. Of course, some of these examples will be chosen to make a point rather than reflect a general behavior, but it's an example that shows what Philip was saying in the previous slide about missing information. I'm not going to comment on the fluency yet. Another example is with this email, which starts by saying liebe Kollegen und Kolleginnen, and my built-in empty engine renders it as, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I should like to begin by thanking the rapporteur for his excellent, etc., etc. So again, this is a hallucination. It's not correct. It's not expected, and it can be explained by the training data coming, in this case for Microsoft Translator, coming in large quantities from UN debates and EU debates as well, and problems being present in the training data, and then as a result we see such output. There's nothing purposefully malignant behind neural machine translation. You're just getting what the training data has. So we shouldn't be overly upset about this, but it's an instance of hallucinations. But then is additional data that is present in the neural machine translation output always an unwanted hallucination? And to balance the slight criticism that I made on the previous slide, here's an example of a translation from English into Romanian, and the English text, it's EU documentation. So the English text says rule 138, and a literal translation, back translation of the NMT output of DeepL in this case would be article 138 from a procedural rule book or collection of rules. So a lot more information than in the original. However, to the institutional translators, this is actually not a mistake, because in Romanian, there's always this additional bit of information that is added, which was simply learned by the engine from the training data, and therefore that's how it appears. So again, hallucinations, they sound horrible, but actually sometimes they are justified and useful. And as a final example of hallucination from English into Romanian, and by the way, we're going to have more examples in the workshops that we are running in April. There are 2 upcoming workshops on machine translation. So from English into Romanian, we see that the machine translation output has presented this term nailing intramedular with an interesting English-like spelling as well. That term does not exist in Romanian. It should be tija centromedulară, but that's not what we see here. The rest of the sentence reads very fluently, and therefore the point I'm trying to make is that if you're a novice translator, or if you're working extremely quickly without paying sufficient attention both to the source and the target, you might skip over this because it reads well, it sounds fairly plausible, maybe there was a borrowing, you might hypothesize, and you just move on without checking. Other examples of machine translation problems that not a lot of translators actually would make. So working with machine translation output is different from working with human translation output. So post-editing is not revision. Refers to handling names, whether they're names of people or names of products. I'm sure everyone has seen when these names were actually modified in some way in the machine translation output. And here I've got a whole bunch of examples from my students who are looking at automatic translations of English scientific abstracts into German. And just because Schiller is extremely present in the training data, the neural network just offers it to us as well, even though it doesn't have any link to the original name that was in the source. So something else to keep in mind and be careful about when working with machine translation is don't think it's a person. So don't think for some reason it would preserve all the identify first and keep all the named entities, all the proper names unchanged. To continue the changing name theme, let's say, again from German into English, an address, a translator might maybe change the way in which the numbers of the street and house would appear in the target text, perhaps, whereas sometimes machine translation, and again, I'm just saying sometimes, it's not always, but sometimes machine translation models decide to simply replace one name with something totally different. So again, it needs to be used with caution. All of these examples so far were quite obvious, I'd say. here's an example where the sense is a bit more subtle. So here, an option on a particular car model in German, it's going to be activated only for 3 years after you buy the car and you activate the service. However, the automatic translation, the machine translation, renders something different. So it's connected drive services are activated only 3 years after the first approval. In other words, you drive without these for the first 3 years, and then only afterwards you'll get these services, which is, again, very fluent, can be overlooked. All the numbers are there, all the proper names are there correctly, but the meaning is rather different. And I'm sure everyone has seen a lot of examples of how sexist and racist and gender neutral content is not really processed very well by neural networks, machine translation, but also large language models. Here's an example, another example from German into English, where there is a way to write in gender neutral manners, but that still hasn't appeared enough in existing training data, and therefore the translation is not ladies and gentlemen, or dear colleagues, for a more even better option. It's just ladies. And my final example, I thought I'd start with, I'll end with a humorous one. It's about a medical well, it's not a medical device. It's how should I call it? It's a knee band. So when you have problems with your knees, you might want to use one of these to hold it in place when you're playing sports or doing whatever you're doing, and you really don't expect it to be detonating on you. You'd rather want it to help your knee to relax and decontract and function properly. But again, sometimes machine translation lacks the training data and the context and terminology, and that's what we get as a result. So as a translator, you always have to be on the lookout for these errors. So what's this discussion that keeps going on about machine translation still after so many years? Some of the reasons why there's so much interest, and there are 244 participants in this webinar, so there is interest, is, in my opinion, that we still have a number of assumptions and terminology problems. So first of all, there are some people who think that artificial intelligence and machine translation is an example of artificial intelligence, either already is or will be soon enough just as good as human translators, or language specialists as now they're called. And we have all kinds of scary titles in the media and tiny bit clickbait. But actually we also have research which is starting to show that, at least in some language pairs and some domains, and especially if we're using customized machine translation models, there are pretty much as many errors in human output as in machine translation output. So we're getting to a point where machine translation output is as good as, or sometimes in other research, we're seeing it's even better than the output of human translators. And it's food for thought. But at all points, I think, regardless of the vested interests in whatever discussion we're having about machine translation, I think we should always bear in mind this point that Intento makes in their State of Machine Translation report, that actually there is no best MT system yet. And always the machine translation performance will depend on how similar your data is to the data used to train the vendor's models. So, we cannot expect a general model that was trained with everything it could find, from TED Talks to subtitles to EU legislation and administrative texts to anything else on the web, to handle amazingly well very specialized texts in the medical domain, as we have seen. So it's really a question of, does the content that you are translating now resemble the training data? If so, then there's a good chance the output will be usable, and actually you might enjoy using that output. Or is it very different? And in that case, don't expect miracles. So that was one assumption. Another assumption is that translation itself is a stable term, but we're seeing that various people, clients, but also some people in project management positions, they understand whatever they understand. So it could be word for word transfers, but it could be full localization, versions, writing, adaptation, all kinds of tasks which some people understand. They all come under translation. So we also need to really make sure that the client knows what they want and we know what we're offering to clients. There are some people that actually think that machine translation is the same as translation, maybe because of all this hype around the topic. So therefore, they think it's a good idea to take linguists out of workflows, because after all, you get machine translation output. So that's as good as a person, right? So you're just doing a bit of brushing up. Well, actually, translation itself, and this is just one of the possible inventories of all the strategies applied by translators in their everyday work. So translation is a very complex and an expert task. It's not just a flipping of words from one language into the other. So it's not word for word. Of course, there will be some use cases where you want word for word. For instance, in a very specialized, well-written, using controlled language user manual, you're not going to start applying too many pragmatic strategies, I guess. But there are also other use cases where you do need these strategies. So I think machine translation, because of the hype, because of the investment that some companies already have put into it, it's kind of trying to justify its existence by applying it to absolutely everything, everywhere, all at once, in a way, to paraphrase. So machine translation really isn't always the same as translation. And then there's also an assumption that post-editing machine translation is a universally understood concept as well as set of practices, when in fact, even if we start from our ISO standards, so the ISO 18587 is the post-editing standard, the standards are still fairly general. So for instance, if we look at the definition, post-editing means editing and correcting machine translation output. Already we're starting to have questions. What does that mean? Is it a monolingual process? Because editing tends to be monolingual. So are we supposed only to look at the target text, the output? Then if we do that, how are we going to work out when there are differences in accuracy between the target and the source? Or is it a bilingual process, in which case you must, as a client, you must allow your linguists the time to read the source, read the target, make a judgment, and then improve the result. So it's not as easy as it sounds. Also, another question is, how much should we change? And that's a really big debate, because with machine translation output, because it's a productivity tool, the ideal is that the translator only, or the post editor only, changes the minimum. So no preferential changes, just fix mistakes. And how does that how does post-editing compare to revision and review? Because again, sometimes we say or we hear there are such different tasks, but when the clients get in touch, sometimes it sounds like they think it's the same. But then they start to say, well, actually, sometimes we don't need a full post-editing process. We only need a light post-editing process. And again, these are justified because not all content will make it onto a published website or in a brochure. Some content is just there to be quickly translated and understood. So, okay, for that, we might not care about some errors and only fix a minimum amount of other errors. But still, it must be a very clear understanding between the client and the translator as to what the client actually wants and what the translator is happy to deliver as well. So are professional translators good at post-editing? Depends on which studies you read, because there was an interesting article book chapter by Joke and Lieve, where they worked with LSPs and used paid freelancers to work on human translations, but also on machine translation output. And the results were quite similar in that the freelancers still left quite a lot of errors in both texts, almost close to 50% of errors. So there must be something going on that's not making translators really good at post-editing. And of course, another big problem is that some people think it's completely legitimate to pay less for post-editing and expect much higher productivity, which again, if you're not using a customized, fine-tuned engine for that particular domain and language pair, and you're not listening to your post-editors, it's sometimes really wishful thinking. So what's all this fuss about machine translation? Well, we're talking about it because, especially nowadays, it's so easily available. It's also very quick. It's instantaneous. Therefore, the general public thinks that translation is instantaneous. It's also very chatty. So there isn't an instance except for when it omits content. But there's no instance when you put in source text and you don't get anything, or you get, I'm sorry, I can't handle this. So there will always be a suggestion. It's starting to be very fluent, just like large language models, LLMs like ChatGPT, they're very fluent. Are they accurate and suitable as well? Another story. Sometimes it can be genuinely useful, and sometimes occasionally catastrophic as well. And it's still a really good solution for low risk situations in a lot of these situations. And it does have potential for even higher risk ones as we gather more training data and we fine tune the existing engines. And we talk about it because it has a lot of supporters. It's an important part of the industry, and we always hear it's the future of translation, and it even has its own ISO standard. So to be honest, based on all of these, to me, it's like a teenager. So it's like having a teenager in the house. Okay, maybe not with the ISO standard. I don't think teenagers have ISO standards, but there's so much hope, and they always have an opinion, and they're always talking to you, and you don't know where these opinions come from. And there is a tendency more and more to just put teenagers in the driving seat, as with machine translation, to just leave machine translation to handle all kinds of really important content. And there are problems when you get into really difficult and dangerous situations if you don't supervise these models. So as any person needs actually not just teenagers around, but actually people of different ages with different experiences, so that we can actually learn something from them. I think we should always keep in mind that translators use a lot of other technologies as well. So machine translation in this recent European language industry survey. Machine translation is said to be used by a minority, and we've seen in our poll, we have a mix of people who use machine translation. Translation memory, on the other hand, is a much more stable and much more used technology. And both of them are supposed to help the translator and give that feeling of trust in a situation. But translation memories actually do that a lot more than machine translation. So I really like this tweet from Paul a few years back when he was saying that happiness is when you come across a completely impenetrable sentence in the source text, and then the translation memory reveals that you translated it in a previous version of the text 5 years ago. So that's why we really like translation memories. And that's why in some of our CAT tools, this is a screenshot from Trado Studio, but of course there are lots of CAT tools around. Translators really like the sense of confidence that the matches area, the translation results, in this case area, offers by showing context matches or exact matches, and then showing confidence scores and differences. So with these fuzzy match scores, what's the difference between the segments we are translating and another segment which is already in the translation memory, so that we can decide what we do with that result. Whereas with machine translation, at least for now, we don't get any kind of useful information. And of course, quality estimation is a big research area. So there are more and more tools that implement this quality estimation score. But again, it's machine learning, and it's sometimes accurate, sometimes inaccurate. So it's a big change for translators from what they used to. So a few examples of different machine translation paradigms, so that we see how it's evolved. We start with rule-based machine translation, which was all the rage starting with the 1950s. And here is a text that I have in German. It's from a Viennese publication. And rule-based machine translation engines would be based on dictionaries and rules. And we could see them, we could understand them, we can understand that the preposition about in English is translated by von in German. But the result in a rule-based machine translation engine was very literal translation. So if we actually look at how the sentence sounds, it's an extremely, well, it's kind of word for word substitution. And sometimes there are words which are not found in the glossary, in the dictionary. And there are also other words which have several translations, and it's just not a very user-friendly way to translate. Then we have crossed a few decades, and we are now in the era of statistical machine translation. And again, we take our source text, and what does the statistical engine do? It uses a phrase table, which is its translation model, which again, we can look at and we can see, although it's all probabilities now, so we get some numbers more and more, but we can still see words and we can understand correspondences, and we can understand why a certain translation appears the way it does. It also uses a language model, which its purpose is to make the target sound as natural as possible in the target language. And then it produces a result, and I'm going to give a result from Kantan MT, which is one of the many tools available now. It's called Kantan AI. And again, we see the result is a little bit more fluent, but there are still issues of fluency. There are words that are left as they are in the target, and also the power of data, let's say, is starting to be felt, because we have a source text that's Austria specific, but the training data has a lot more instances of German German government as an equivalent for Bundesregierung, and therefore that's what we get in the result. Again, it's not malvolent, but it's just what the data has. And then we have machine translation in its neural incarnation. So from 2016 onwards, where as we read the text, it's very fluent, but there are also some issues. We still have the German government when we're still talking about Austrian situations. Google, as opposed to DeepL, was a bit more neutral, so the federal government is a slightly better choice. But then we also have differences in tenses, which are extremely important for the actual translation, but can be easily skipped over by the unsuspecting translator. So what I'm going to do now, because I'm looking at the time, and I think we want to leave about 3 minutes for questions, is that I'm going to save the demo on how neural machine translation learns for the workshop. So I'm gonna skip over a few maybe slightly disturbing insights into how really devoid of semantics and human intelligence as we understand it from a translator's point of view, this process of training machine translation engines really is. And I'm going to highlight a couple of things before I ask Sohila to play a little video. So what you could do straight away, if you are not really, well, if you want to play, let's say, so if you want to play with machine translation and customize your engines, or maybe even just use some engines out of the box, but you don't want to use let's say the big ones, is you could straight away go and check out a tool called OpusCat, which you can download to your computer, and in that way it's safer, a lot safer than using and giving your content to the free versions of the online machine translation models. So you can use Opus, and you can also fine-tune, so improve the quality or see if the improvement works by adding a translation memory that you already have. So fine-tuning means making the model more appropriate for your kind of content. And it's just a very simple click and select process. So you have to have your translation memory in TMX format. It should have a few thousand segments, and then you will see what the results are. And this is just one example of a general model that you can all download, or anyone can download in Opus, versus a fine-tune one with TED Talks. And we see some changes in terminology. So the Gespräche is now Vorträge. And there are these kinds of changes that you might notice, and they might actually be good enough for you to encourage you to use machine translation a bit more if it really helps your work. In our work, we compared general machine translation versus fine-tuned machine translation in the medical domain. We had a project with English into Romanian, and in 75 segments, we saw a decrease in the number of errors from 234. So that's a scary number. It's almost 3 errors per segment to about 100, well, to 140, which is just under 2 errors per segment. So fine-tuning does work, it does help, but it still does not make the output perfect. So you still need linguists. I think that's the biggest message that I want to pass on. Don't fire all your translators just because there was some nice headline about a machine translation model somewhere. Test things first. So I'll wrap up. Machine translation, neural machine translation is unfortunately still quite unpredictable, although in some language pairs and for some domains, it's still, or it already is extremely useful. It's the kinds of errors that are present in neural machine translation output are not always very obvious and easy to spot. So we still need to be looking at both the source text and the target text in order to really work out those fine or subtle errors. And sometimes it's really hard to do that when we are under pressure and we're told we have to work faster and cheaper. So what do we do in these situations? And this video shows something that we have been experimenting with in Vienna, whether being able to listen to the text while you are post-editing can help you identify some of these errors. And this video is going to show you Trado Studio with a plugin called TTS. And it's going to show you what that looks like in practice. And if you want to experiment with hearing the source and the target text, I know some people read them out already, but if you want to see how artificial voices might be able to help you as well, you can simply export the text into Word and then ask Word to read aloud, and then you'll see the same results. So let's see how this looks, and then we'll take some questions if that's okay. Some of our translators really like the possibility of just getting out of this text-only silent mode, especially when you're getting tired after looking at so many segments. And it's really good to know that you already can enhance your environments with these text-to-speech plugins. Sorry if it was a bit fast, but I hope you got a bit more of an idea that machine translation is still, it's already useful, but it's still not 100% foolproof, that we still need to evaluate individually its suitability for various scenarios. And if you want to share some examples with us later on in April, we're looking forward to seeing you then. So thank you, and let's see if we have time for at least a few questions.
Thank you very much, Dragos. That was absolutely fascinating. We've been having the questions flooding in. I don't think we're going to have time to cover all the questions, but maybe if we cover just a few. I mean, if we go just a few minutes over, Dragos, would that work for you?
It's fine by me. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's dive straight in. So First question here: is it inevitable for translators to transition into the role of post editors?
Oof. I don't think it is, because I know that quite a lot of translators are working for direct clients. So I would say if you're working for an LSP, especially a large one, I think in that case it already probably you have already transitioned. But if you're working for direct clients, you have a lot more freedom over what tools you use. I personally find machine translation useful, but sometimes you really it has this impact on you. It's called the priming effect. That sometimes it just channels your thinking, and you realize later that perhaps the choices that you made prompted by this technology weren't exactly the appropriate ones. So in some cases, you actually will remain better off without it. And the final thing that I want to say is that I think a lot of people, apart from the increasing quality of fine, okay, but I think a reason why a lot of people use machine translation also has to do with the fact that not many people like to type. So we're not fast typers. I mean, some people might be, but not everyone. And we just hate typing. So, you know, if a good enough solution pops up for you, you might think, okay, fine, I'll just change a couple of things and just leave it. Good enough. Whereas you could, at least in our work, we see some scenarios in which you could get the same productivity increases by dictating. So you speak, you remain in control of the translation process. You are the best subject matter expert, and you know the source language, and you just speak and dictate your translations, and you can increase your productivity that way as well. So to wrap it up, I think inevitable is a scary way to put it, but I still like to think it will be a personal choice, and you might need to argue your case a little bit. But if someone is imposing on you for productivity reasons, and you already have the data that you are already faster in some other ways, then at the end of the day, the client will care about the speed, and whichever way you produce it is not going to be that important.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so next question. With an increasing number of translation agencies opting for machine translation post-editing to cut costs, there are instances where a task labeled as machine translating post-editing transforms into a retranslation due to the subpar quality of the initial machine translated content, basically. What actions are there any actions translators can do in response to this situation? You receive, a poor quality machine translation that maybe doesn't actually save you time or very much time when translating.
They're already in CAT tools. We have tracking mechanisms, and we can produce reports saying, okay, this is exactly how long it's taking me, and it's a lot longer than what we maybe optimistically agreed on at the beginning of the project. So it's, I think, getting to know the CAT tools, because still, at least from what I know, CAT tools, the CAT tools are still the environments in which most post-editing actually happens. So getting to know them in order to be able to produce these kinds of detailed reports on how long it takes you, how many changes you have to make, maybe also using the error labels in many CAT tools to demonstrate, look, I'm having to correct a lot of accuracy errors, but also stylistic errors are not far behind. So getting to getting to know how to collect this data, so that after half a day of working on that subpar machine translation quality, you can go back to the project manager and say, look, I'm not reaching the agreed targets. We have to do something about it. And of course, there will be companies where the PM will be very upset. But I also think it's not very helpful to demonize all LSPs, because they in turn may be under pressure from their own clients. So I'm sure the story is a lot more complex, but from a translator's point of view, I would advise collecting data, getting in touch, and making your case. And sometimes, just like LSPs sometimes fire their clients, I'm pretty sure there are a lot of members in the audience who have also fired their own LSPs and just moved to more sensible ones.
Very good, very good. Okay, a very specific fun question here, which has general context as well. So the word Anlagen, German. So we're testing your German here, Drago.
Oh.
I often have to scrutinize the target text, as MT often hesitates between financial investments and industrial facilities. I've been caught out again, lack of concentration towards the end of a long task. Any tips to avoid these issues, apart from having good breaks and searching the potentially problematic terms in the source text?
I would personally, but again, I'm biased. I'm clearly biased on this. But I would encourage, just try out working with this speech synthesis. So export from the CAT tool as either if you were using Trados, I think it's called bilingual review. It used to be called external review, or from other tools, you can export a 2-column Word format for your source and target segments, and then use the Microsoft Word read out loud functionality, because as you hear the text, it's really, for this specific example, I'm really sure it's gonna strike you as out of context to hear the translation for the finance when it should be industrial setting. Yeah, that's my initial reaction to that.
Okay. Another specific question, an interesting one. If I fine-tune neural machine translation using my own TMX, my own translation memory, does that enter into the public domain?
No.
Are there data security issues?
If you're using Opus Cat, no, as far as I know, because first you need to download the MT model to your own computer, and then the fine-tuning happens on your computer on your copy of the model. It doesn't go up. So that's for this particular tool, Opus Cat, and it integrates into Trados, Phrase, MemoQ, and there might be some others as well. So it's quite useful. And then if you want to be fine-tuning your own cloud-based versions, then you can only do that if you pay for access. And in that case, the reason you pay for access is so that your data remains private. So again, that solves that problem that way. But otherwise, you can't fine-tune like DeepL, for instance. You can't just drop your TMX somewhere to make the open access DeepL better.
Okay, very good. Well, we've had loads more questions coming in. I think maybe we'll probably have to leave it there. But a common question people are asking is what is the future in terms of the future for translators? Is it endangered by AI and advanced technology? I mean, obviously we know translation workflows may change, but just sort of maybe a final thought on the future.
From what I see, it's definitely machine translation is a lot of people's main technology of interest, but we're seeing also a lot of development in AI, which again, machine translation is AI, but for the general public, ChatGPT is AI. So we're seeing actually quite interesting implementations of large language models together with translation memories and term bases to fine-tune and improve dynamically the automatic suggestions you're getting for your text. So that combination is a bit more user-friendly for the translator, because you're not going to have to correct the same mistakes all over again. It's also unpredictable, because everything with neural networks is a bit unpredictable. But the initial results and the quality seem to be very encouraging. There's also a move towards automatic post-editing, but again, I'm looking mainly at English and Romanian. So from English into Romanian, automatic corrections by AI is sometimes genuinely laughable. So as a translator, I would say continue to be resilient, because for better or worse reasons, LSPs will continue to push technology and machine translation, and even AI enhanced machine translation to cut cost or to please their clients or whatever. But at the end of the day, the LSP will not have the time or the expertise to realize what kind of risks the client runs if you follow the workflow and mistakes are made. So I think people are very sensitive to the idea of risk. There are several translators, Chris Durbin is one of them, who emphasize how important this is when you negotiate your contract specifics with the client. So as a language specialist and as a subject matter expert, you should have the confidence to make your voice heard and to say when something is helpful and something isn't helpful, and justify that with data from the technology, as well as this evaluation of future risk for the client. And I think also one of the big things for translators, I suffer from this as well, is to let go of some of our preferred, I don't know, ways of being trained, or sometimes it's the translations are very close to our heart, but the reality is that these translations in some cases will be read once and then thrown in the bin. So we need to appreciate that different content has different lifespans, and really adapt our ways of working to match that. So if someone is not paying me to fix stylistic errors, I know it's going to be hard, but I'll just try and I'll do my very best not to do it. So we need to recalibrate, which is quite hard to do. But appreciate the whole context of the job, and sometimes just send a stern message back to the project manager explaining where they're wrong, and see what comes out.
Okay, very, very, very helpful and interesting. Okay, well, thank you very much then. We have, I'm afraid, well, we've run out of time, we've run over time, so thank you to everyone who's still listening in and has been contributing to this fascinating webinar. As mentioned by Dragos, if you are interested in delving deeper into post-editing, we will be running with Dragos and colleagues from the University of Vienna Center for Translation Studies a couple of half-a-day workshops, so that's 3 hours each on Friday the 26th of April. One is for those with English as source and one for English as target language, going in more depth with tips and tricks, practical interactive exercises and discussions. So highly recommended if you're looking to improve your skills, speed of translation, maybe even earnings when post-editing. You can find details on these on our website via training and events, focus sessions and workshops. We price them as effectively as possible with a discount for COL members as well. So just to wrap up, everyone will receive a CPD certificate and link to a recording of this webinar in the next few days. COL members can log it on my CPD as well. Thanks once again to everyone watching and participating. And thank you very much, Dragos, for this fascinating presentation and discussion.
My pleasure. Can I end with one slide which I skipped over? But just because I'm looking at this title, and I remember we promised people a lot more on evaluation as well, and I'm feeling terrible. And I just wanted to end or just put this on everyone's radar. Again, those people, because it seems that there are some people in the audience who really want to give machine translation a try and to get a bit better at evaluating whether it's suitable or not for an upcoming project. I saw this recent post from the Slater Toolbox. This arrived yesterday, and it has a really interesting article within the newsletter from Yuri Balashov about practical steps and 2 particular tools that you could use in order to see whether an engine or several engines that your clients are asking you to use or you want to use yourself is really suitable for the kind of content that you are translating. So I thought that was genuinely interesting, and I hope it helps at least one person in the audience as well.
Well, actually, there's been a lot of the questions I haven't read are sort of in terms of evaluating MT as well. So there's many more will be grateful for that as well. So thanks. Thank you.
This is about super. This is about automatic evaluation. The manual evaluation that I mentioned very briefly that we performed in the medical domain is you're not going to get that kind of fine-grained information from these automatic evaluation, but still the two exist and they complement each other.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we must wrap up here. Thank you once again, Dragos. Thank you to all our audience, and we hope to see you on a forthcoming webinars and maybe even the workshop as well with Dragos and colleagues.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I hope it's been helpful.
It's been illuminating. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye now.